Earl Briggs. The year was 1954. Youngstown, Ohio. Every morning at 5 o'clock, he would get out of bed, pick up his jacket, and walk out the door. The steel factory he worked at opened before sunrise, and Earl left before sunrise. Not a word spoken, not a glance back, just the door closing. And his son Dale would hear that door every single morning. Dale was only 8 years old. He would lie in his bed, waiting for that sound. In the dark of early morning, sleep wouldn't leave him until that door had closed. And years later, at 72, he told a journalist this: "My father never once said, 'I love you' to me, but every morning I knew that door was closing for me." Now I want to ask you a question. Can a father love his son for a lifetime without saying those 3 words? And if he can show it without saying them, why is there an industry making millions of dollars today teaching us to say those 3 words? I won't give you the answer just yet. The 9th point will surprise you. Greatly subscribe before you get there. This channel talks about the things that were never said but filled an entire life. Share your thoughts in the comments. 1. They got up every morning. Flint, Michigan. Clarence Holt would wake up every morning at 4:45 without an alarm. The steel factory opened at 6:30. The commute was 45 minutes, and Clarence had never been late. Not once in 10 years. His son Gary was 10 years old. One morning, getting out of bed, he watched his father walk out the door. Clarence wasn't fast. He was tired. He paused for a moment, putting on his shoes. There were circles under his eyes. His shoulders were bent forward. But he paused. He didn't stop. Gary carried this his entire life. He told his own son, "Your grandfather never got sick. When he did get sick, he still got up." I will never get tired of telling this story. Researchers examining American working-class households in the early 1950s found something consistent. For the large majority of the fathers of that era, going to work was not an abstract responsibility. It was the concrete expression of living for the family. Walking out the door every morning was a commitment, even when tired, even when sick. Today, the self-help industry tells you, express your emotions to your child. There are workshops, books, podcasts, all saying the same thing: speak, feel, share. But nobody says, get up every morning. That too is an expression, the oldest and most powerful one. And the child sees it. He sees it without ever being taught to look. Clarence Holt said nothing. He just got up. 2. When they gave their word, they always kept it. Peoria, Illinois. Willard Hicks had promised his son Ronnie that summer that they would go fishing. Ronnie was 9 years old. He had never gone fishing before. He waited for a whole month. July came. Willard got sick. He had a fever. His throat hurt. Saturday morning, his wife told him, "Don't go." Willard didn't answer. He quietly got dressed. He picked up the car keys. "I gave him my word," he said, and they went fishing. Willard sat by the river for 2 hours, wrapped in his coat, shivering with cold. Ronnie didn't catch any fish that day. The water was too cold. But Ronnie's father was there. Despite the fever, despite the shivering, he was there for his son. And on the way back, in the car, Ronnie said, "Aren't you sick, Dad?" Willard said, "No." He said nothing else. Columbia University psychologist Walter Mischel's research says something very clearly. Children of parents who keep their word develop a much stronger capacity for trust in later years, not only toward people, toward life. And the roots of that trust are planted in those 2 hours by the riverbank, not through illness, through going anyway. The therapy industry tells you to express your love in words. But when a child sees his father sitting by the river with a fever, he doesn't need words. He knows it in his body. He knows it in his bones. Willard Hicks went to the river. And Ronnie kept his word for the rest of his life. 3. They quietly corrected their mistakes. Toledo, Ohio. Elmer Stokes had said they would paint the neighbor's fence. The neighbor was traveling. Elmer got to work alongside his son Kenny. Kenny was 11 years old, and the brush in his hand was nearly bigger than he was. They started at 10 in the morning. Then Elmer opened the paint. It was the wrong color. He had bought dark brown instead of light yellow. Kenny noticed. "Dad, that's the wrong color," he said. Elmer first looked at the fence, then at the paint, then at his son. He said nothing. They stopped that day. The next day, he got the right color. He repainted the fence. He spent 2 more hours on it. He told the neighbor what happened. The neighbor said, "No worries." Elmer said, "No, that won't do," and kept going. Kenny stood beside him and watched. He didn't say a word, but he didn't look away either. Years later, Kenny said, "My father didn't teach me to apologize, but I watched him turn back after every mistake, and that is something weightier than any word of apology." Stanford psychologist Albert Bandura's social learning theory says this: children don't learn moral behaviors from explanations. They learn them from watching. How a parent confronts a mistake, how they correct it, how they go back, this process builds a lasting schema in the child. This schema directly shapes how the child manages their own mistakes in later life. The emotional expression culture tells you to talk about your feelings, acknowledge your mistakes, apologize. But Elmer Stokes didn't talk. He repainted the fence. And Kenny never just left a single mistake behind for 50 years. Keep going. The next 3 points are the least discussed part of this list, and perhaps the most important. 4. They came back. Erie, Pennsylvania. Clifford Marsh had gone on a business trip for 5 days. His son Terry was only 8 years old, and before leaving, Clifford said to him, "I'll be back soon." He said nothing else. Clifford came back on Friday night. It was late at night, and everyone in the house was asleep. Clifford put down his suitcase. Without taking off his jacket, he went to his son's room. He slowly opened the door. He didn't turn on the light. He just walked in, leaned against the door, and looked at Terry. He looked at him for minutes. Then he closed the door and went to sleep. Terry hadn't actually been asleep. And the next morning, when he heard his father's voice, he ran down the stairs and hugged him. Clifford said nothing. John Bowlby's attachment theory says this: for children, the most critical question is not, "Does he love me?" The most important question is, "Will he come back?" This distinction seems small but carries an enormous difference. The father who comes back gives a guarantee that goes beyond words, that life continues, that home is here, that he himself has value. And this guarantee works far deeper than the words, "I love you." Self-help books teach you to write departure speeches. Say, "I'm going, but I love you." But Clifford Marsh gave no speech. At 11 at night, he opened the door and looked at his son in the dark. That was enough. In truth, that was the only thing his son's heart had been waiting for. Keep going. What comes next is the least discussed part of this list, and perhaps the most important. Because a father doesn't say his love, but shows it by coming back. Doesn't come back, but makes it felt by sitting beside him. And doesn't announce it, but protects by setting a boundary. These 3 things most often don't look like love, but they are. 5. He was there. Lansing, Michigan. Merle Dutton's son Dennis was 12 years old. He hadn't been selected for the school baseball team, and his spirits were very low. Dennis came home. He sat at the table. He ate. He said nothing. Nobody asked about it, and he didn't bring it up either. That evening, Merle was repairing something in the garage. Dennis came in. He sat down beside his father. He didn't speak. He just sat. Merle didn't speak either. The 2 of them sat there for an hour, the hum of the garage light, the sounds of tools, and silence. Heavy, but soft silence. Then Merle got up. "Come here," he said. "Hold this screw." Dennis held it. Just that. Dennis Dutton told this story years later. That evening, my father didn't say, "It'll pass." He didn't say, "You were treated unfairly." He didn't say, "You're so good." He just sat there. And that sitting was more than anything that could have been said, because if he had said, "It'll pass," he would have made my pain smaller. By sitting, he acknowledged that my pain was real. Martin Seligman's resilience research reveals this. What children need in disappointment is not comfort, it is presence. Feeling that someone is beside them, that they haven't been lost. Comfort, on the other hand, often diminishes the pain. When you say, "It'll pass," you are actually saying, "Don't make it too big." And the child receives that message. The therapy industry wants you to turn every disappointment into a conversation. Name the emotion, share it, process it. But Merle Dutton just sat. And that sitting is the quiet foundation upon which Dennis stood upright for the rest of his life. I need to stop for a moment now, because I was wrong about this too. For many years, I mistook these men's silence for coldness. I called it emotional poverty. I said they simply couldn't express themselves. I said that generation was like that. I said you can't expect it from them. And that thought felt comfortable, because when you think that way, you're accepting their shortcoming. And when you accept their shortcoming, you're endorsing your own excess. I was wrong. These were not men who couldn't express themselves. These were men who expressed themselves through action. And that difference is as great as a human lifetime. What the child remembers when he grows up is not hearing "I love you." It is seeing his father go to the riverbank while sick, watching the wrong fence get repainted, feeling someone sit quietly beside him in that garage, hearing the sound of a door opening late at night and someone walking in, being handed the knife. All of these are love, but love in its wordless and active form. And this form outlives words by far. I understood this too late, and for a late understanding, it is always others who pay the price. 6. They work together without explaining. Rockford, Illinois. Leland Cross pulled his son Bobby into the garage every Saturday morning. Bobby was 9 years old. He came in rubbing his eyes every time. Sleep in his eyes, hair messy. Leland didn't say, "What are we doing today?" He just said, "Come." Sometimes they took apart an engine. Sometimes they hammered nails. Sometimes they just carried things. Bobby would come not knowing what they were doing and understand when he saw what was being carried. Nobody waited for him to learn. He just did it. Once he asked, "Why am I always watching you?" Leland didn't answer. He kept going. But 3 weeks later, he told Bobby to tighten the screw himself. "Hold this. Turn it." Bobby turned it. The screw went in, and Leland smiled. Bobby was 35 when he left Rockford. He joined a large factory as a master craftsman. On his first day, he said, "I already knew all of this. My father taught me." Research on apprenticeship and the master-student relationship in the 1950s shows something consistent. Working side by side creates a far more powerful bonding and learning environment than face-to-face conversation. Focusing on a shared object, a shared task, joins two people in a way that words cannot. Working together builds a deeper bond than agreeing together. The emotional expression culture tells you to sit down, talk, share your feelings. But Leland Cross said, "Come." He said nothing else. And whenever Bobby spoke about his father for 50 years, he always talked about that garage. 7. They set boundaries out of love. Wichita, Kansas. Chester Norris's son Larry was 10 years old. One evening at dinner, he said something rude to his grandmother. Exactly what he said isn't known, but Chester's face changed. He put his fork down on the table. He made no sound. He looked at Larry for a long moment. Everyone at the table went quiet. Larry went quiet. Chester got up, took Larry to the living room. He closed the door. He lowered his voice and said, "Nobody in this house speaks to anyone that way. It won't happen again." He left the room, said nothing else. He came back to the table. Dinner continued. Larry never did it again. And years later, Larry said, "My father wasn't angry at me that night. He loved me. I have always known this. But in that moment I understood there is a frame in this house. And stepping outside that frame harms everyone, including me." Psychologist Diana Baumrin's authoritative parenting research in the 1960s found this. Children of parents who set clear boundaries without punishing produce the strongest outcomes both socially, emotionally, and academically. A boundary was not a punishment. A boundary was a frame. And the frame was safety, a space to exist in, to breathe in. The self-help culture tells you to talk about everything with your child, share every feeling, set limits together. But Chester Norris said one sentence: "It won't happen again." And Larry heard love inside that sentence. 8. Even when they left for the last time, they left something behind. Tulsa, Oklahoma. Harlan Webb was sick that year. It was cancer. Everyone knew, but nobody said it out loud. That was the time. Illness was carried in silence. His son Donnie was 14. He came to the hospital every day. Harlan couldn't talk much. Sometimes they would just sit together. They would look outside through the window. Sometimes Donnie would tell stories. Harlan would listen. One day Harlan turned to Donnie. His voice was hoarse. "Find the butcher knives on top of the cabinet. They're yours." He said nothing else. Donnie nodded. Harlan Webb died at the end of that year. Donnie found those knives. He still uses them. 50 years have passed, and every time he uses them, he remembers his father, his voice, his hand, the window in that hospital room. And that short sentence, "The butcher knives, they're yours." John Bowlby's research on grief and attachment says something very clearly. People remember their loved ones not through grand conversations, but through concrete objects and small rituals. A knife, a jacket, a toolbox. These are the vessels in which love is carried. There are no words inside them, but they are full. And because they are full, they still speak 50 years later. The therapy industry tells you to have farewell conversations, express your feelings, complete your goodbye, tell them what you feel. Harlan Webb pointed to the knives. And 50 years later, those knives are still speaking, still warm, still Harlan Webb. 9. When they were proud, they showed it instead of saying it. Gary, Indiana. Vernon Holt's son, Terry, was 13 years old. That year, he had placed first in a math competition at school. He came home. He put the certificate on the table. Vernon looked at it. He picked it up. He read it. He put it back down. He said one thing: "Let's call your uncle for dinner." Terry was surprised. Why? He should see this. That evening, the uncle came. The certificate was on the table. Vernon showed it to the uncle. Terry got this. He said nothing else. Terry carried that evening throughout his life. "My father didn't say 'well done,'" he said years later, but he called the uncle, and the uncle saw. And that was much greater than saying, "You're amazing." Social psychologist George Herbert Mead's research, which drew wide attention in the 1950s, revealed that the most powerful form of pride and honor is reinforced through public recognition. For the child, the most meaningful reward was not the parent saying, "Well done," but the parent saying to others, "Look what he did." This difference seems small, but its permanence is very different. Today, every success gets an instant "you're amazing," fast, reflex, and quickly forgotten. But Vernon Holt called the uncle, and Terry has been carrying that pride for 50 years. Love is sometimes calling the uncle. And this brings us back to Earl Briggs. Youngstown, Ohio, 1954. The door is closing. Dale is 8 years old, in bed. He hears that sound. Now I understand what that sound meant. I am here, I am going, and I will come back, because you are here, and you are everything. Earl Briggs never said, "I love you." But every morning that door closed. Every evening it opened again. for 50 years, without a single exception. And Dale, every morning when he heard that sound, knew he was not alone in the world. Someone was getting up for him, someone was going out for him, and someone was coming back for him. Today there is an industry, the therapy industry, the self-help industry, the emotional expression culture. It convinces you that getting up every morning isn't enough, that you need to say it, that you need to express it, that years of opening the door and walking back in still isn't enough. And this industry, because it created this need, earns billions of dollars selling this need. Earl Briggs didn't say a single word, but he got up every morning. Clarence Holt went to the factory every day. Willard Hicks went to the river with his fever. Clifford Marsh opened the door at 11 at night. Merle Dutton sat in the garage and said, "Hold the screw." Leland Cross said, "Come." Chester Norris said, "It won't happen again." Harlan Webb pointed to the knives. These are the language of love. Wordless, but very real. And today, nobody teaches this language, because this language doesn't fit in a book. It doesn't fit in a workshop. It only fits in a life. And it is lived alongside life. Share your most powerful memory of your father as a comment. Start with the word SEP. One sentence is enough, because these stories must not be lost, and they must be told before they are. The last word belongs to Earl Briggs. Every morning the door closes, and every evening it opens again. Still.